Okay, I hope this is recording. Hi everyone. I'm going to be giving like a really short video here about protists and fungi, just some like general knowledge information about these groups. And later, hopefully this will be made into a playlist that includes all of your smaller videos that go along with this. So we're going to start by talking about protists. And, these are just a couple photos of, groups of protists, and they're, very different from the looks of them. And if we look at what a protist is, these guys are eukaryotic organisms. They are single or multicellular, and they range from microscopic to incredibly large. Like the seaweed here is made up of protists. It's a very large organism when it's all together as one. But these other small groups, this is 2 micrometers in length, or in width, I should say. So very tiny to very, very large. These are classified as their own little group because of a couple differences between plants, animals, and fungi. So, differences between plants, gametes and zygotes are not protected from drying out for protists. Differences between animals is they do not undergo embryonic development. And differences between fungi is that these cell walls don't include chitin, which fungi cell walls do. And again, we talked a little bit about how diverse these are, but their diversity is what makes them really difficult to try to compare to any individual other group of living organisms, because there's so much complexity, and some of these go from really small and simple to really complex or really large. So there's just a lot of variation within this group. Okay, general biology about protists. Most of them are free living, and most of these, inhabit wet or moist habitats like the ocean or freshwater. Some are parasitic, which I don't think any of the groups talk about, but I might be wrong. You'll have to watch the videos to find out. Sexual reproduction occurs when environments are stressful, but most of the time there will be some sort of asexual reproduction going on within these groups in a normal, non-stressful environment. Most live in wet habitats, as I mentioned, and many of these organisms are photosynthetic, and they actually help contribute to about half of the world's photosynthetic energy. And that's, I think, within cyanobacteria alone. So there's probably even, a greater abundance of photosynthetic energy contributed just by protists, even though, we don't think of them as a big photosynthetic group. We normally think of plants, but these guys are tiny and do a lot of work. They also have a few different modes of transportation. And this kind of, shows us how diverse they are. So if we look at paramecium here on the left in figure A, we can see the structure of the single-celled organism, and it's surrounded by these really tiny little hairs called cilia. And these little hair-like structures, if they're all moving and all contributing to motion in a single direction, help this organism move around. Amoeba are here in the middle. One group talks about this, but I like to talk about this stuff. So I'm going to repeat them. They use pseudopods, which are these I don't know if you can see my mouse. Hopefully you can. These arm-like structures. So, this arm will extend and try to pull the organism forward. I'm pulling my hand backwards, trying to show this. But then it's going to pull its body forward and then re-extend that arm and keep trying to move in that direction using these pseudopods. And these also are something that these organisms use for feeding. So they'll try to engulf things by kind of capturing smaller critters in their pseudopods and then pulling them back into their, well, I guess it's a single cell, so it's already in the single cell, but you get the point. It's pulling it further into the organism. And then over on the far right and C here, there's Euglena. And these organisms use flagellum to move, which instead of cilia, this is a single, or some species have multiple, but you can think of this as just a long whip-like tail. So instead of many small appendages moving around, it's one long tail that's whipping around, helping to propel this organism. Okay, so here's a little phylogenetic tree. It looks terrible, I'm sorry. But I really like this tree just to look at the tree of life. So we already talked about bacteria. Viruses aren't going to be on the tree. Archaea are more closely related to bacteria, just kind of live in extreme conditions typically. But then we come over here to domain eukarya. And this is where we're going to focus the rest of this unit on. So protists take up this left part of the tree, as well as this left portion of this clade over here. And this clade is, these organisms in this clade that are still protists are more closely related to plants, fungi, and animals. And you might notice some weird things here. You might see we have this little group of protists here that's more closely related to plants, probably because they both photosynthesize. But then if you look closer to the right side of the tree, you'll notice that fungi are more closely related to animals. And, that is actually the case. I have text here. I stole this slide from someone. We as researchers, when we use molecular data, it shows us that animals, so, us, a bunch of other animals, are more closely related to fungi, which we'll talk about a little bit, than we are to any other domain of life, or larger group of life, I should say. So fungi, there's many characteristics of fungi, and they vary a lot as well. But most of the fungi that we see in nature serve as some sort of decomposer within their ecosystem. So you'll often see them on trees, and they're, eating the tree, or they're on a dead tree already, and they're helping to decompose this tree, and they're using that energy themselves to reproduce and grow, but they're also contributing more to the environment. The main structure of fungi is referred to as hyphae, even though we commonly think of mushrooms, right? If you think of a fungi, this is probably the classic photo that you would think of, not with the cat, but you get what I mean. Mushrooms are actually just used as a reproductive structure, and these are what they use to release spores. So instead of dropping flat on the ground, there's some movement, especially when there's wind. If a mushroom releases spores, which are tiny particles, and a little gust of wind can help carry that pretty far away. So they're not landing on top of the same organism and then not going anywhere. There's some mobility with these, but it's really limited. Importantly, fungi can also reproduce in a asexual or sexual manner. Depends on the species and the environment. So if we just look broadly at these groups of fungi, we have yeast, I didn't make this very well, yeast and mushrooms, and we have molds, there we go. And these are all classic fungi groups that we think about. Maybe you don't think of yeast as being a fungi, but yeah, the yeast that helps make your bread is a fungi. Molds are fungi, so these typically thrive in more moist environments. So if you have a humid apartment or dorm room, you're probably more likely to see this mold growing. And then actually right on the horseshoe, I think right now you can see some really big shelf fungi like this, or shelf mushrooms, growing on trees. And yeah, they're feeding on the trees or on the moss kind of growing on the side of this tree here. But also, and this is really cool, fungi are part of what make lichen. And lichen are organisms that you'll see on rocks, kind of like this. And moss needs some sort of thing to grow on and get moisture from the soil, but these lichen can just grow on rocks, and they're just photosynthesizing right on top of this rock. And we'll talk about this more way later in the semester, but they're really good at inhabiting and being the first inhabitant to a new barren place. So if you just have a pile of rocks, there's a really good chance the first thing that will ever grow in that area are lichen. And that's made up of fungi and algae, specifically cyanobacteria. And this is just you don't need to know this, but the upper and lower layers of lichen are composed of hyphae, and this middle layer here is an algal layer, and that's where the cyanobacteria of these organisms resides and helps provide energy for lichen. Okay, so just the super basics here. Mushrooms, again, as I already mentioned, these are the fruiting body of the organism, and they are the reproductive portion. So if you can see my mouse, and hopefully you can, I'm trying to outline the bottom section of the mushroom, and this is where the spores of this organism would be released. And within the mushroom, and going down into the ground, we have hyphae. And these are really long and thin strands that come together and make up the mycelium, or this underground layer. They kind of look like a big root system, but we call them mycelia. And then we have mycorrhizae over here. And this is a place where fungi and plant roots often come together, and we'll see many sort of mutualistic relationships between fungi and plant groups. We talk about at least one, or at least your videos talk about at least one, but this is really common in nature. And you'll even see like a lot of soils advertising as including mycorrhizae because they're beneficial for plants. Okay, I have a little video here. I don't know if it's going to play, and I don't know if it has sound, so I'm going to just try it, and I might need to narrate.
Fungi are multicellular, heterotrophic organisms with bodies composed of long threads of cells called hyphae. Hyphae obtain nutrients by absorbing pre-digested food. Fungi reproduce sexually or asexually by producing spores which are dispersed by the wind. Spores that land on a moist substrate will begin to germinate. These spores grow into long branching hyphae. A tangled network of hyphae is called a mycelium. Mycelia can be huge. There are reports that the species Armillaria bulbosa have spreading mycelia that can cover hundreds of acres. As a group, fungi are decomposers and play a key role in the food web. As mycelia grow, they release digestive enzymes into their surroundings. These enzymes break down the macromolecules found in leaves and other decaying matter, liberating smaller subunits like sugars and amino acids. Let us look at how fungi digest and absorb their food. To begin their extracellular digestion, fungi must first release many digestive enzymes. These enzymes decompose complex molecules like cellulose, RNA, proteins, and fats into simpler subunits like glucose, nucleic acids, amino acids, and fatty acids. Once these smaller monomers are produced, the fungal cell absorbs them into its cytoplasm, where they are used to provide energy for the fungal cell or as building blocks for fungal macromolecules. The mushrooms that we find in the forest are the reproductive structures of large underground mycelia. The spores that the mushrooms produce germinate and grow into hyphae.
Okay, I think that's it. The main point I wanted to get across with this video, and it does a lot of good things, like illustrating the movement of the spores. But the really important part here I want you guys to take away is that fungi are obtaining their nutrients by just releasing digestive enzymes. And these digestive enzymes help break down larger molecules in the environment, and the fungi then are able to absorb those once they are broken down. So that's how fungi proceed to grow. Okay, hopefully. All right, perfect. Um, okay, so here's just another image of our hyphae at a much closer scale. And here's what spores look like and how they're released. Um, so pretty much the underlying part of this mushroom here is lined with this, you know, I don't know how to describe the shape, but these oval shapes that are really thin and compact. So they're able to, hold hundreds of thousands of little spores like this and then release them. And these are going to spread like pretty close by, but ideally not right on top of the, rest of the hyphae here. So they're able to colonize new areas, specifically when they land on more moist soils. And again, fungi are decomposers in the ecosystem, so they can break down organic molecules that many other organisms just can't do. Here is another close-up of hyphae. Importantly here, and I think I have another photo, the hyphae and mycelium, the underground web, here have a really large surface area to volume ratio. And this helps them break down a larger area of underground matter compared to if it was just, if you stuck the mushroom underground. It's only going to be able to release its enzymes in that little area, where if you have this large web-like structure underground, it's able to release enzymes over a greater area and obtain more nutrients because of that. Okay, not super important, but just want to cover this briefly. So we already mentioned how fungi can reproduce asexually or sexually. So here's just a little diagram showing the asexual reproduction, where spores germinate and they're released by the mushroom. That's over here. Sorry. Spores released, they germinate, become mycelium. That mycelium grows and grows, obtains nutrients. It produces a mushroom, and the cycle just goes on. So we're not getting any new genetic material here. We're keeping the same genotype for all of these individuals. But we also have sexual reproduction with these organisms. So, okay, let's walk through this. We have mycelium, so our large structure, and we have plasmogamy, which is the fusion of cytoplasms. So I have a slide on the next slide, or a photo on the next slide that helps explain this. But you could imagine that if we have, two closely related mushrooms that are, same species, if they both release spores around the same time, we'll see what we call karyogamy, which is the fusion of two nuclei to form a new genotype for the offspring. So we could have, I'll just jump over to the next slide. You could have this red individual or genotype, we'll call this R and we'll call this G. And if those two spores are released in the environment at the same time and come in contact with each other, they can start to fuse like this. And, once they're part of the same cell, those two genomes can essentially just come together. And we all of a sudden have a brand new genotype for our fungi. This is a form of sexual reproduction. We're forming a new individual from two parental genotypes. Whereas over here, if we go back, we're sticking with the same genotype, and this is just a never-ending loop. This isn't super important. The main thing you should know is fungi are able to use asexual and sexual reproduction, in that the spores fuse to create the new offspring, and after meiosis and the spores germinating, we could see that that new group of ours go and do this, just reproduce asexually, and then we have an all new genotype of individual within our environment. So I think that's all I have, I think. Yeah. Okay. So thank you guys for watching. Um, this will be part of a playlist that I almost have put together. I just have to upload this video. And I will send out an announcement that includes a link to this, as well as updates on worksheet and quizzes related to this playlist of videos. Um, get these in by the second test, which is in 2 weeks. So take your time with it. Not a big rush.